Welcome to AQS Inmate Call. I'm your host, Joel Wilborn. If you ask the average person how parole works in America, they'll tell you it's binary. Some states have it, and some states don't. And on paper, that makes sense. Since the rise of strict truth in sentencing laws in the late 1970s and 90s, 17 states and Washington, D.C. officially took discretionary parole off the table for the vast majority of incarcerated people. The legal jargon says they shifted to determinate sentencing. It sounds definitive. It sounds like the door is completely locked. The key is thrown away, and the parole board packed up and went home. But here's the twist. Those parole boards didn't disappear. Today, we are breaking down an eye-opening, deep-dive brief by Leah Wang at the Prison Policy Initiative. The data exposed a striking reality. States without parole look a whole lot like the states with it. They feature fully functioning, taxpayer-funded paroling authorities that hold massive power, but release next to no one. Let's look at what early release actually looks like behind the hollowed out curtain of truth in sentencing. So if a state abolished discretionary parole decades ago, what are those boards actually doing all day? Mainly they are managing what we call dwindling populations and hyper-narrow criteria. See, in all 17 of these states, people who committed their crimes before the abolition date are still technically parole eligible. In places like Maine and Indiana, that means people are still fighting for release for sentences handed down in the 1970s or earlier. In states like Virginia or Wisconsin, the cutoff is in the 90s. The scale of this varies widely depending on the state's specific loopholes. In Maine, the number of parole-eligible people has literally hit zero. But in California, due to recent legal expansions for long-term offenders, there are still over 41,000 people eligible for a discretionary hearing. 10 of these states also allow parole under very specific narrow buckets. Like if you receive a life sentence, were a youth at the time of the offense, or fell outside specific sentencing guidelines. But look at the actual grant rate for the lucky few who have even gotten a hearing. In Virginia, the parole grant rate is staggering, abysmal 1%. In Minnesota, it tops out around 23%. Compare that to states that actually keep standard discretionary parole alive, where grant rates can soar past 50% or even 70%. Meanwhile, taxpayers are still footing the bill for 5 to 21 member boards. More than half of these states have 5-member boards, and almost all of them are appointed directly by the governors. This turns what should be a tool for rehabilitation and discretion or decarceration, into an extension of political power. Look at Kansas. They clearly overhauled their board to pack it with law enforcement requirements and shifted appointment power straight to the attorney general and governor. Now, critics of discretionary parole love to point out that these states don't need it because they have other statutory release vows. They talk about mandatory parole, medical release, and earned time. But the data exposes these vows for what they really are: completely underutilized or intentionally clogged. Take mandatory parole or mandatory supervised release, like they have in Illinois or New Mexico. It sounds like an upgrade because the board can't deny your release date. It's required by law at the end of your sentence. But the research suggests this approach isn't working well. Without the structural preparation of true discretionary parole, mandatory supervision actually leads to higher rearrest levels and lower levels of successful supervision completion. It acts more like an administrative trapdoor than a meaningful off-ramp. And then there is the crisis of our aging prison population. Prisons literally turning into multi-million-dollar nursing homes. 15 of these jurisdictions claim to offer medical parole or compassionate release, but the bar is set so astronomically high that people regularly die of terminal illnesses while their paperwork sits on a desk. Arizona is the ultimate outlier here. Out of all 18 jurisdictions without standard parole, Arizona is the only one that provides absolutely neither medical nor geriatric parole. If you are sick or elderly in an Arizona prison, there is no structural valve for mercy. What about good time and earned credits? They tend to be incredibly stingy. States with strict truth in sentencing guidelines intentionally design their earned time policies to offer minimal days off. Sentencing credits should complement a parole board appearance where an incarcerated person can demonstrate their transformation. They shouldn't be a hollow, restrictive substitute for it. But it's not all grim news. The stagnation of these hollowed out systems is fueling a massive wave of grassroots advocacy. Advocates on the ground are realizing that tweaking the edges isn't enough. In states like Illinois and Maine, coalitions are actively campaigning to entirely reinstate retroactive discretionary parole. They want to go back to the root of the problem. Meanwhile, in Washington State and Wisconsin, the focus is heavily on expanding compassionate release and pushing for a second look sentencing laws that allow judges to reevaluate excessive sentences after a person has served a significant number of years. New Mexico actually moved the needle recently by passing legislation stating that parole readiness should be based on dynamic, forward-looking factors like active rehabilitation and personal growth, rather than just the static, unchangeable facts of the original crime. That's the North Star right there. True parole should be about who a person is today, not who they were decades ago. When wielded transparently, urgently, and completely independent of partisan politics, parole is the bedrock tool we need to safely end mass incarceration and reunite families. If you want to see the full state-by-state breakdown and the comprehensive appendix table from this briefing, head over to the Prison Policy Initiative website at prisonpolicy.org. Their independent research makes episodes like this possible. Consider supporting their work. And as always, thank you for listening to AQS Inmate Call. Stay grounded, keep building coalitions, and we'll catch you on the next line.